I think why I figured out why these podcasts go off because of my computer is, I guess, timed, and it doesn't shut off, but it goes to sleep if I'm not uh, messing with it. And when it goes to sleep, that's why it shuts off the podcast. So anyway, now I figured that out. But so what I was talking about is that Great Britain has abolished slavery in the 1830s. And now it has a huge voice in Texas, although it doesn't want to control Texas. It's persuaded Texas to stop the African slave trade. Now, it was pretty easy for Texas to stop the African slave trade. They were getting lots of slaves from Louisiana. It was very, very easy for slaves from Louisiana to cross the Sabine into Texas. So it wasn't like a huge deal that Texans aren't buying slaves from Africa, but symbolically it was a huge deal. And what happens is Southern slaveholders in the United States begin to think that Great Britain is going to have such a big voice in Texas politics, in the Republic of Texas, that eventually, maybe in a decade or so, Great Britain is going to persuade Texas to abolish slavery in Texas in the same way that Great Britain has abolished slavery in all its possessions in the Caribbean and in the Western Hemisphere. This freaks out Southerners. They're determined to make sure that Texas comes into the Union as a slave state. From their point of view, if slavery is abolished in Texas, the South then becomes surrounded by territory that was not slave, not only on the north, but also Texas to the west. So Southerners are really freaked out that Great Britain is down the line is going to persuade Texas to abolish slavery. And what that would do is that would put a boundary on the ability of slavery to expand in North America. If there was no slavery in Texas, then slavery really can't expand anywhere else in North America. So, my lecture notes just blew away. Hold on. Sorry about that. I didn't want to stop the podcast. And so what you have is a drumbeat in Washington among Southern slaveholders to take a second look at annexing Texas into the Union. Also at this time, even Northern interests are a little bit worried that Great Britain might gain too much control over Texas as well. And so they mute their opposition to Texas coming into the Union as a slave state. In Texas, the disasters in Santa Fe, the Meyer expedition, the fact that Texas is poor and not doing so well economically. Sam Houston's president again. And so what you have is a push not only in Washington to bring Texas into the Union. You have a push in Texas as well. So this is kind of the big picture story of why Texas comes into the Union. And there's a lot of machinations. There's ultimately Texas comes into the Union through a means of more of a treaty than a classic annexation. This is kind of why, even to this day, you have Texans saying that these secessionists saying that Texas is an independent country. It's not. That's just the long and short of it. So what happens is that the folks that want Texas to come into the Union for whatever reasons, mostly Southern slaveholders, but also enough Northerners as well, that Texas is annexed into the Union in late 1845. The official ceremony happens in early 1846. So now Texas is part of the United States. So Texas comes into the Union, but the boundaries of Texas are still not set. Now the Sabine, as everyone recognizes, is the eastern boundary of Texas. The Red River is the northeastern. But it's very, very unclear if the Nueces will be the southern border of Texas, which is what the United States and Texas claims, or would it be the Rio Grande? Now, the reason that Texans and U.S. government wanted the Rio Grande to be part of Texas wasn't that the land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande is worth that much, although it turned out to have millions of cattle on it. What they really want access to is the Rio Grande, because folks in the 19th century, they see rivers as transportation highways. So one of the important reasons that Texans wanted the Rio Grande to be the border of Texas, the southern border of Texas, and the southern border of the United States after 1845, was that they wanted access to the Rio Grande because they saw the Rio Grande as a transportation artery that would lead into especially the mining areas of northern Mexico, which were very, very wealthy at this time. There was a lot of mining, there was a lot of mineral wells still being mined in northern Mexico as late as the 1840s. So this is why the Rio Grande is so important, because of its role as a kind of a transportation artery that offers access to West Texas, but much, much more importantly to northern Mexico. So what happens is there's a dispute, and Mexico's furious when the United States annexes Texas into the U.S. Mexico breaks relations with the United States, and it becomes very, very tense. So what you have is the United States ultimately will go to war with Mexico to establish the Rio Grande River. The Rio Grande River is kind of redundant, isn't it? To establish the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas, as the southern border of the United States. And this is the documentary that you're going to be watching now. This is what helped start the Mexican-American War. It starts in many ways over the question over the southern boundary of Texas. Would it be the Nueces or would it be the Rio Grande? But there's a bigger picture here too. The U.S., Polk especially, wants to buy what's called Mexico's Northern Territory, an area that goes all the way California, Arizona, New Mexico. And so that's part of the thinking as well. But what happens is the Mexican-American War, which is about a huge part of the United States, the southwestern United States, the actual war itself starts on the Rio Grande and starts in Texas with Zachary Taylor. So what you have is a couple of things going on. The U.S. and Texans want the Rio Grande to be the southern border of Texas and the southern border of the United States. But also Polk, as the documentary explains, he wants a war with Mexico because he wants to capture this huge area of the Southwest, which stretches from California all the way to New Mexico. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave you now, and the documentary, I think, does a really good job of telling the rest of the story about the Mexican-American War. I'm not going to have you watch the whole thing. I'm going to have you watch the parts that deal with Texas specifically. The last thing I'll say today is that 1848, the U.S. wins the Mexican-American War, and it's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which I'm going to want you to know about. That's what creates the border. The Rio Grande is the official southern border of Texas. Very, very important document that's not really remembered that well in U.S. history, although it's remembered more and more. Huge moment, 1848. And that's also the treaty that brings the Mexican Northern Territories, 55% of the Mexican nation, into the United States. California, Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and what we now call South Texas, the area between the Nueces and the Rio Grande River. A really significant moment, not only in Texas history, but also in U.S. history as well.